Today we are in Tallahassee, Florida, where it's been sunny and considerably warmer than some parts of the country this winter. This has been an unusually cold winter. We're now in the March of 2014. For those who were in Chicago or Michigan or just about a lot of other places, you understand that. So we're in Tallahassee today at Florida State University talking with Faye E Jones, who has been the director of the Research Center at Florida State University's College of Law since the summer of 2004. Faye is also a professor of law. Faye, as is sort of customary in these conversations, could you tell us a little bit about your life, both when you were young and perhaps today?
Right. I was born at Camp Lejeune in North Carolina because my father was in the Marine Corps. And my early life was spent traveling from place to place. We lived in San Francisco and Hawaii and some other, military bases, and then came back to North Florida where my parents were from, where I went through, primary school, high school, and then I came off to Florida State for undergraduate. And now I'm back in Florida.
Kind of come full circle, huh?
There's a story about that, actually. I'll tell you later on.
Okay. Well, why don't we talk a little bit about your academic background, your degrees, and where you got them?
I went to Florida State for my undergraduate degree, and I thought I would be a high school history teacher. But after I interned at a junior high school, I went home hoarse every day. And at that time, all the counties in Florida were paying their teachers according to what they could pay. And so I was offered a job making $6,000 a year, and I thought,
Did it come with food stamps?
there's got to be a better way. So I said, what if I came to school because I loved being in the library, and I decided I was going to be a librarian. So I went right from undergraduate into library school and finished library school. And Ed Schroeder, whose position I now have, helped me get my first job at Duke, where I was a serials librarian, and I had not ever had a vision of being a law librarian, but when I was working at the state library, I was making $1.20 as a student assistant, and the law library was paying $1.60, so I came to the law library.
You were stolen by the law library.
History was made, absolutely. So 25 years later, I had been through a number of different career changes, and I was nominated by Lolly Gassaway for this job at Florida State. And I thought, I really don't want to leave Northern California, but I really trust Lolly's judgment, so let's try this out. And when I got here, I found out how productive the faculty was, and I thought it would be a lot more exciting place to be a law library director, where there's a lot happening, and that has really proven to be the case. So 25 years later, I came full circle and came from being a student assistant here to being the library director here.
Well, I've already alluded to the rather cold winter we've had this year, or much of the country's had. California has not really suffered from that, but their weather isn't so super either. They've been in drought, pretty severe droughts. So maybe being here in Florida has some advantages weather-wise in other ways than just it's a little warmer.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Although we have lots and lots of rain. When I was in California, people always said, oh, all those hurricanes in Florida. And of course, here in Florida, everybody says, oh, all those earthquakes in California.
Well,
so there's always something to worry about.
Every place has something.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, so, well, life's full of trade-offs.
Right, exactly.
Speaking of life, do you have any other passions when you're not working, hobbies, that sort of thing that you'd like to mention?
Oh, I love traveling, and I've been, last year spent a month in Australia, and while I was there, gave a speech on identity theft at the University of South Australia's law school, and got a chance to see Sydney and Melbourne and Adelaide, and then up to the Great Barrier Reef and Port Douglas, and just had a wonderful time. I like cooking and wine, but I also like things that are not so self-indulgent, like strength training and football. My FSU
Good.
Seminoles
Oh, yes.
and the Seahawks. I love,
A Seahawks fan.
Right, a
I
Seahawks
became
fan.
one this year, too, for some reason.
Well, we used to live in Kent, Washington, and
Uh-huh.
we had season tickets to see the Seahawks when they played in the old Kingdom.
Yeah.
So we're from way back.
Well, I imagine that. Well, I'm sort of a Seahawks fan now. I mean, they did so well this year. They won the Super Bowl, but I really, we lived in D.C. for so long. I'm sort of a Redskins fan.
Right, yeah.
Which puts me on the outs with a lot of my friends in the Seattle area.
Well, at some point they'll have to change their name to something else, I expect.
Well, I think the pressure is going on Mr. Snyder, who owns them, to come up with a name that's a little more politically correct in today's
right.
environment.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's resisting mightily, but who knows?
Only a matter of time.
I suspect you're right about that. Well, let's talk a little bit about your career. Specifically, was there anybody else or anybody that played a specific role, perhaps, in recruiting you into law librarianship, or did you sort of decide to come in on your own in some other way?
Well, the late Brian Polly, who was the cataloger here at FSU and then was the Florida Supreme Court librarian, was really instrumental in convincing me, that law librarianship was a great thing. And then, as I said, Mr. Schroeder helped me get my first job. At Duke, I worked for Kathy Price, and Kathy's been important to me throughout my career. I met Lolly Gassaway while I was in North Carolina, and she's been really important to me also. So I got my start at Duke, then I came back to Nova, where I went to law school. And Connie Pine and Jeannie Underhill were really important, mentors for me there. I decided when I was in law school that I should get some practice experience. I thought it would really enhance law librarianship for me to have that practical skill. And so that's why, having been in a military family, I thought of going in the Navy. And so I was stationed in Pearl Harbor and San Diego, and then stayed in the reserves and finally retired as a commander in 2002.
So you were an attorney for the Navy.
Right, exactly.
With postings like that, so when you ever retired? If they
Well,
kept sending you back and forth between Honolulu and San Diego.
That's where I was,
Yeah.
And I decided the Navy because I had friends who'd gone in the Air Force and the Army, and they'd been offered things like Minot, North Dakota, or Fort Dix or something like that, Fort Sill in Oklahoma, and I said, no, I don't think so. But the Navy always has good bases close to the water, so that's what I did.
For some reason, I guess it works better to be close to the water when you're in the Navy.
Really nice, yeah. Very nice.
So you retired from the Navy, and then that's when you went to the University of Puget Sound?
No,
No,
actually,
before.
when I left active duty, I stayed in the reserves, and so I still had, my weekend reserves and my 2 weeks in the summer. But I went back to law librarianship because I said, this is why I got the degree. This is why I got the MLS, the JD. Now I've got that practical experience, so let me go back and see what I can do with a law library career. And I was lucky to get a job at Puget Sound. We had the opportunity to live in Seattle. I got an opportunity to work with some great colleagues there. And I had my first experience of being mentored by a dean of a law school at Jim Bond. And ever since, I've realized that that's really also another important role in being mentored. And while I was at Puget Sound, I was able to work on a university committee about choosing a new integrated library system, and we chose innovative. And that was a great experience, really a great experience.
A little scary.
It was scary, but I've always thought in law librarianship that it wasn't like the Navy. We don't have nuclear weapons. We're not going to destroy anything. Let's see what works.
Somebody once asked me about integrated library systems, again, when they were new and pretty pricey. I guess they probably still are pretty pricey. And I said, well, worst case scenario is you get one that works, but you're probably not going to have it forever anyhow. This technology keeps changing, and you'll be able to replace it because you'll have to replace it. So if you feel you've made a mistake, keep it to yourself until the time comes to move on to the next generation system.
Some things in libraries are like that. I think ILSs are. On the other hand, library furniture is still pretty much the same. It seems like you get it, and 35 years later, you've still got it.
We went through that when I was a student still. I was at the University of Washington. Marion Gallagher was the director there, law librarian as we called them. And, they'd had chairs in the reading room that had been there for about 45 years. And they were falling apart, so they needed to be replaced. So they got all these fancy new state-of-the-art chairs in there and let the students try them for a while, see what they all liked. And the vote came in very heavily in favor of just keeping the old chairs.
Oh, great.
So they had to find a place that could actually manufacture chairs that were basically the old design, and they did. So that's the kind of chair they had. They swapped them out one summer. So you had what looked like the same chair in the fall when it came back, but it wasn't falling apart anymore. It was new.
Right.
So that was choosing furniture is its own challenge.
Well, when I came into, speaking of Mrs. Gallagher, when I came into law librarianship initially in 1975 with my first job at Duke, there were all those names of great, giant librarians everybody knew: Marion Gallagher, Julius Mark, yourself,
I don't know
Mr.
about myself. I was
Mursky.
pretty junior
No,
in those
definitely.
days.
All these people that, well, there's a lot of people there, from Marion Gallagher to Kathy Price, that I think of as being sort of the giants of law librarianship. And then, of course, there's that mid-level of newer people too: Dick Danner and Mike Chirazi and Penny Hazelton and people.
Well, I
like
see
that.
them as giants of the field too.
Yeah, absolutely. They're the
They
current
really are.
leaders. Yeah,
Yeah.
Billy Joe Kaufman.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Billy Joe, of course, is my successor at American.
That's right. Yeah.
So people ask me, do you ever visit the place? And I have. But, do I have any problems with the changes she's made? Well, she's been there 10 years now. If she hadn't made a few changes, I would wonder in today's environment.
Oh, I think some of the changes are almost pushed by, the availability of information, the reduction in budgets, what faculty and student expectations are, the pressure on space. The library used to, have a big footprint, but it has a much smaller footprint now. And the shift is to more student collaboration and study spaces, a lot more focus, I think, on students than on collections.
I think one of the facts, in my career, we were building libraries in terms mostly of books, because in those days, people who should have known better but didn't tended to evaluate law schools on the basis of their library collections in terms of what they actually owned that was on the shelf. Today, I think you've moved beyond that to providing what's necessary, but providing access. So you don't have to have all this paper taking up valuable space when you can go online and call the same exact thing up, and everyone has access to it who needs it.
That is true, but there are still those times when we have to report volume count for ARL statistics.
Oh.
And also when some law school or university administrator wants to say, we have nearly 500,000 volumes, in the law library collection. Whereas what I'm trying to shift them and university publications and other things too is we have access to more than 300 or 400, legal and law related databases available on campus and all points where there's an internet connection.
Yeah. You still have people that want to brag about volume count. Well,
Do still.
I mean, that's what we used to see. And I remember when the American Bar Association changed its standard subtly, but somewhat very effectively, in that they said instead of having possession, you had to provide reasonable access to materials, that would meet the requirements.
Yeah, I think we're definitely far down that road now, but sometimes you do have a little sort of a pop-up of the past.
Yeah, well, it's interesting to hear, because I would have thought that there's been enough churning of people in some of those positions that maybe some of the more current thinkers would be in those positions, but it sounds like there's slippage from time to time to old ways.
I think by and large, most people do realize that we're in an era of accessibility, not collections. But I am familiar with that too, because from 1975 to now, there's been a sea change. In those days, in the 70s, everything was print. We had a Lexus terminal at Duke when I worked there.
Uh-huh.
It was about the size of half a conference table. It had a big...
Was that big wooden table thing?
Yeah.
With a telephone that you had to dial and then hang the thing into an acoustical coupler?
Exactly. It
put
had
the
this
receiver-
giant gray
Yeah.
sort of coupler, and the faculty at Duke's laughed about it and said, "Oh, this will never take off. It's
Uh-huh.
just, Ohio Supreme Court stuff." And they would use it to make toll-free calls to D.C. to friends and stuff.
That's right. They had a,
So
I
when
guess they call it a Watts line, an incoming Watts line. In those
That's
days.
right. When I went off into the Navy, when I came back, it was a completely different world.
Yeah.
Already it was Lexus and Westlaw, and the change away from print to digital had already started then.
Yeah. Well, I remember when we moved off of that equipment, and then we had a thing we used to call it the chiclet keys. There was a Ubik, I think it was called. It was a very small thing that it was modeled to look a lot like a little PC or personal computer of the era.
Yeah, when I was at Puget Sound, we had a Lexus Deluxe terminal, that was all
Uh-huh.
built in. And Bob Minento was one of my colleagues there. He used to play the drums on the Lexus Deluxe right outside my office.
The other features of that era was that because of the capacity of the computer systems, the law schools couldn't use it in the afternoon, as I remember. So if you wanted to use this magic new electronic toy, you had to time it, so you'd come in the morning when it was available, or depending on where in the country you were, because there was a timeout for schools that I think coincided with the afternoon work on the eastern seaboard of the United States.
Yeah, and in those days, you had to use a script for dialogue that was
Yes.
about 35 steps
Yes.
long. And the searching that people have now is just so many thousands of times better, but it still has room to improve.
Yeah, but it's hard to realize. I started out, my first job out of library school, out in law school, was at the University of Houston. And this was the late 60s, and when the man on the moon landings were occurring. And, we thought this was really interesting to be so close to the Johnson Space Center down in Houston, where all this stuff was going on. Occasionally we'd drive out there and look around. They had, it was open to people that wanted to do that on Sundays. And you could see the banks of computers in this one area. It was all glass enclosed, and tremendously big tape drives that they had the data on. And this was where NASA had all this information they needed to make all this space stuff work. And yet now, in my pocket, there's a telephone that has more computing capacity than all that stuff NASA had in those big rooms.
That's like a trip to Weston Egan, Minnesota that I made one time. They had a whole room full of giant blue computers that were, the room was cold and everything, and I wonder now what they have there.
Probably something considerably smaller, but,
imagine.
and a lot more powerful and fast.
Right.
Yeah, it's been something to watch this. Now you, in campus settings, are involved in teaching as well, and you have a history of that. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of that, and perhaps maybe how you as a law librarian see that as a role that is appropriate?
Oh, I definitely think it's a huge role for us. I think it's the future of law librarianship. And when I started at Puget Sound, I just taught advanced legal research, co-taught with some colleagues, and it seemed like a good thing to do, but it didn't seem as important to me as I now think it is. And then when I left Puget Sound and went to Hastings, I got heavily involved in teaching, and I also realized that if I wanted to be a library director, I needed to have a substantive area, and no one else was teaching cyber law. And I've always been fascinated by technology, and I think what our job is really so technology focused that it seemed like a natural to me. And that was just the heyday of Silicon Valley too. So I was able to get the general counsel at a lot of things like Netscape, and come and speak to the seminar class I taught at Hastings. And then I transitioned to being the director at McGeorge. That was my first directorship. And I took cyber law with me as the course I taught there. And taught both at Hastings and McGeorge Pacific, and then came here to Florida State and had continued to teach the courses I teach, but also was able to open up opportunities for library faculty. So now we teach advanced legal research in both online, asynchronous form, and face-to-face. And we have 3 courses that reflect the strengths the law school has identified for itself. So we teach a business law research class, international and foreign legal research, and environmental legal research. We've added a tax legal research class, and we're also going to be teaching a legal research for Juris Master students who come in. And that's why I say I think our future is really teaching. Like law firm librarians, we've started to be revenue generators for law schools, as well as reaching the students with a valuable skill that they need. So we're going to try compressing our summer, or taking our summer 7-week advanced legal research class and teaching it during the semester, so that students can complete something, in a shorter period of time than they would in the whole 13 weeks. And I think we've really created a library faculty role that didn't exist when I was first starting in law librarianship.
I saw the same thing. As a director, I taught all the years I was at American, and I had taught the 2 prior places I had been, but in the research and writing area there. Whereas at American, I taught actually regular courses, substantive courses. But what you described sounds like a very good role for librarians. I mean, this is our expertise. Well, maybe not mine in my generation as much as today's law librarians, but dealing with all this stuff.
Yeah, I think that as we've hired more JD, MS librarians, there's been a professionalization of the teaching. And now with the emphasis on experience in law schools, the demand for students to come out with skills, we're at the right point where we're already doing it and now it's valued. So that's really a great, I think, synergy.
It's an interesting development. I imagine empowering the other librarians, or colleagues who work with you here at the university in the law library, by letting them be part of this is both good for everybody, including themselves. It must make their jobs all the more interesting.
I think it does. I think it gives them a lot more connection with the students, and proving their expertise as teachers gives them an in with faculty as well. I've always wanted us to be an indispensable partner in the productivity of the faculty and the students. And I think we've got that. We try to have people co-teach and get a good set of teaching evaluations, and then after that, let people go on their own. And so fully 8 of our 10 librarians teach. And as there are retirements, we will fill those other positions. Everybody will be teaching.
Well, that sounds like an interesting development. Now, one of the questions I sometimes pose specifically, and I'll sort of pose it now, is where you think the role of librarians is moving, in academic law librarians, to be specific. I think you've already basically talked a lot about this in the teaching role, but would you want to focus a little bit and talk about the future as one can, which is a lot of guesswork, I think?
I think that as librarians do more teaching, more work with faculty. They become research partners with faculty and students, where I think that they will start to write more scholarly pieces that are substantive law pieces. And I really see library faculty as strongly developing in law schools as almost an equal faculty, law faculty, legal writing, clinicians, library faculty. And so that's where I think the library, unlike some predictions that the library and librarians were going to cease, is really not true at all, because with so many different databases and no standardized searching, there's a real need for not gatekeepers but navigators and partners. And so we have an upper level writing orientation. All of our students have to write a scholarly 30-page paper. And then out of that, what happened is that students began to see librarians as people that could advise them about topic choice and research strategy, and who could help reassure them that they had done enough research, or help them when they got stuck. And that has meant a real great partnership. And now I think we have a reputation for that that's just going to increase.
This almost sounds like you've developed sort of a mentor system within the institution. Maybe not a formal one, but the librarians can fill the role of working with students almost like a mentor with a protege, helping them identify areas that they might want to look and consider. I don't know if you would describe it that way. I guess I'm sort of thinking about it a little bit that way.
I can see that as how things really develop. We've had a tremendous number of students who've seen us teaching and then decided that looks like an interesting job. I'd like to do that. So we have a JDMS program for people who want to be law librarians, and we've had great placements help with those students getting jobs. And even for students who don't decide to be law librarians, we have a lot of them who will call us or email us and say, I'm stuck and this is the task I have, can you help me out?
I guess it was sort of on that focus that I was thinking of this type of mentorship. I mean, often one does see a mentor as somebody who follows in your footsteps in the same exact niche of the profession, but I'm thinking more broadly, people who they get into practice, or they're in other courses or even your own courses, and come in to get advice of the sort that a mentor and protege relationship could develop of sorts.
Well,
which
and
could
that's
carry on.
Yeah, one of the reasons I wanted to get as many members of our library faculty as Florida bar members is so that they can become involved in bar committees and other kinds of things, do CLEs, continue to have that ongoing relationship when students or alums are practicing. That way we can help the students that we're teaching who are currently in school now get connections, find jobs. We can really contribute to the law school across, the whole spectrum.
This sounds like a nice movement, and I suspect one that is going to be occurring, if it's not already, in many other places.
I reach out to all the other departments in the law school to try to help them as much as possible. And we even added a graphics position so that we can do things for other people. Like we created this really great template for syllabi for faculty. And we help them with SSRN and Espresso and just about everything we can think of, putting up exams in Blackboard, our course management system, and trying to think of ways to generate, being entrepreneurial, really, looking for ways to make ourselves indispensable. That's what I really want to do, because I don't want anybody to ever say, what's that library? Who are those librarians? What are they doing?
Or worse, why do we need those librarians in that library? Nobody's ever in there. Well, actually, they are in there, but it's not the faculty, it's the students.
Right.
It's the faculty asking these questions. But you basically made the library much more of everything that affects these people and helps them.
I think we all have to do that. That's definitely the library of now as compared to the library that I used to work in when I first started.
Well, it's probably been a very fascinating thing to watch develop. A little scary now and then, perhaps, but sounds like you've navigated the shoals and not run up on the rocks or anything. And
I really love it. I love the idea of change and how to implement it, and just making ourselves more productive, just like the faculty, and really trying to make ourselves indispensable. That's really my goal.
okay. Now, another aspect of the faculty role, the more traditional role, is scholarship, publication, that sort of thing. Do you have any thoughts? You've engaged in some of this over the years, quite a bit, actually.
One of the things I do think is that for a library director, it gets harder and harder if you're teaching every semester, as I am. So my focus now is not really on my own scholarship as much as encouraging my librarians to write things and to give them time off. There's no sabbaticals or research leaves for librarians here, so I try to create opportunities for people to work from home and to do those kinds of things. I write a lot of recommendation letters for people to go to the ALL Leadership Academy and other kinds of, SEAL and ALL. And that's my goal is really now to encourage the people that I work with to do their own scholarship. I am writing a chapter in a new book about librarian as fundraisers, so I'm going to be learning about that and adding to
Probably stuff you're already doing. You already mentioned working with other parts of the law school and becoming, instead of a net cost, also producing revenue. Well, librarians as fundraisers are sort of a version of that, I guess, too.
Right. I've been involved with the board of the College of Communications and Information, where I got my MLS. So I know their development director, and I've been involved with some of their development activities. And I think that's a new role that I'd like to move into. And I'm also very close with our university librarian, helping them negotiate contracts and advising them on copyright. And one of the other things I think that law librarians might do is move into being copyright officers in universities and even into university libraries. There's an increasing demand for, I think, law librarian expertise there.
I would imagine in negotiating some of the arrangements you have, especially for digital information, since a lot of that doesn't involve actually purchasing the item, so some of the traditional library empowerments in the copyright law don't necessarily apply. It would be an interesting time to be involved with that and help to create what really should develop and help it to foster that to happen in terms of allowing cooperation between libraries like we've had in the past, and not cut off by clauses and contracts that say you can't do this or do that.
Right. I think with interlibrary loan, we come against that, and we look at our licensing agreements and see what are we allowed to do. I'm concerned about what happens with licenses if we don't have any rights to material if we cancel the subscription. So that's very important for us to look at. There are just a lot of interesting things about it. Whereas we used to buy to own and to supplement, now we buy for accessibility. And sometimes that does give me pause, but I still feel that's where we have to go.
I remember over the years the contracts that the law schools had with Westlaw and with Lexis said that this was for the use of your own students, and by that they defined the ones that were in the law school as opposed to other places on campus. And the same thing with your own faculty, and you weren't to allow others to do it. And this was always, from time to time, a political problem for me as a law librarian at American. Somebody from another department thought that the library's paying for this. I, as a faculty member, though elsewhere on campus, should have the same rights that your faculty have. And I can understand where they were coming from, but I had to say, well, we don't quite have that authority to allow that. Now, we were as creative as we could be in terms of some of these people were JD prepared. And we'd make them adjunct faculty members and teach a course in the law school, and that usually got them into Lexis and Westlaw quite legitimately. But we couldn't do that with just everybody.
Right. We've had those questions here as well, but since they have academic access to Lexis in the undergraduate library, that's taking care of a lot of that.
Right.
And we do have some courtesy professors and adjunct professors, but it's not as big a problem for us as it once may have been. And then at the same time, there's increasing pressure on Lexis and Westlaw from Bloomberg, from Ravel, from Case Finder, some Lois Law, other kinds of things. Fast Case here in Florida. If you're a Florida bar member, you have access to it. And so there are there's a lot more access, and they're also allowing, Lexis is letting students use it in the summer. So there's a big change there too.
Yeah, I remember they were concerned that they would go to work for some law firm all summer and use their academic access, and they used to cut that off.
They do some, but now they're going to expand it, and I think it's purely business competition.
Well, we used to play them against each other quite frequently. Business competition being what it is, and that was great.
Well, now with so many other entrants and and so much free access, I think they have to redefine their role. Lexis and Westlaw, what are we trying to do here? What do we offer?
Well, from what I hear from colleagues out there, they're still charging an arm and a leg for their services to most people, so they must be making some money.
I'm sure they do.
Yeah.
I'm sure they do.
Well, we're sort of nearing the end of today's conversation, but it's sort of customary to ask if there's anything we have not talked about that you would like to mention or bring up.
I've probably mentioned it in passing, but I think mentors are really, really important, and I think we can be mentored by the people that we work for, but we should also take guidance from people that are at our own level, our friends in the profession, and even from the people that work for us. So I've been fortunate to have great, as associate directors, Kim Clark, Robin Galt, and now Elizabeth Farrell, and even my mentee, Elizabeth Christian at Emory. I really learned a lot from them, and I think that's accepting mentoring and providing mentoring is really about engagement with the profession. I think we must have timed out.
Edit this out, but I don't know why it seems dark. But
because these lights, if you don't move,
yeah, it may be an interesting exit, but we're sort of at the end of the thing. Is there any more on before I cut you off with the lights getting cut off? It must be one of those switches that turns them off.
It is. You have to get up and move around.
Oh, they use those in Europe. I was over there a few weeks ago on a trip, and we had to jump up in the halls and the hotels and wave our hands to turn all the lights back on periodically.
Well, the university is pretty serious about trying to reduce the footprint and keep it, green. So we have no control over these. Sorry about that.
Oh well, they tried that at American U too. They put one in my office that turned off the lights, and as soon as the guy left, I ran to the hardware store and got myself a real old-fashioned switch and switched it back, and they never caught me.
Well, we do that with space heaters and fans and stuff.
Yeah, we weren't supposed to have those either, but people did. Yeah. Well, I certainly have enjoyed talking with you this. Now it's beginning of the afternoon, but today, and for allowing us to learn about yourself and talk about our profession. And I want to thank you not just on my behalf, but also on behalf of Michelle Wu, Frank Hodak, and Dick Spinelli, with whom I have the honor of being part of putting together this oral history of law librarianship for the Spinelli's Law Library Reference Shelf section of Hein Online.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Faye, for being part of it today.
Thanks. It's been fun.
Good. Even if the lights went off. Good.